My brothers and sisters, the history of our people is written not only in ink but in tears. Tears shed in the cotton fields, in the hulls of slave ships, in the pews of churches, where hope was the only inheritance we could pass down. Tears cried for sons and daughters taken too soon, for mothers who prayed through the night, for fathers whose voices were silenced before their time. But let us be clear, those tears were never wasted. They were not tears of defeat, but tears of endurance. They became the water that nourished resilience, faith, and dignity in the soil of suffering. From every tear dropped, new life has sprung forth. Every weeping voice has been a testimony that tomorrow will be better than today. The tears of Black people are the rain of our history, watering seeds of courage, creativity, and faith for generations not yet born. They fall on the barren ground of oppression, and yet somehow green shoots emerge. A people who were told they were nothing became a people who made something out of nothing. These tears carry within them the wisdom of our ancestors. They remind us that grief is not only sorrow, but also resistance. To cry is to love. To cry is to remember. To cry is to refuse to be hardened by hatred. Tears wash away despair and make room for hope. And so today we must not hide our tears. We must honor them, because through them our children and our children's children will inherit a harvest of justice, equality, and peace. The future is being watered even now, not by power, not by wealth, but by the tears of a people who refuse to stop believing in tomorrow. So let the tears flow. Let them fall like sacred rain, for they do not signal weakness, but strength. They do not announce an ending, but a beginning. And long after we are gone, those tears will speak. They will remind the world that the seeds of freedom, dignity, and love were watered by the cries of a people who never stopped hoping. Tears are not merely drops of sorrow that vanish into the ground. They are historical documents written in the most intimate ink of the human spirit. Every tear shed by Black people across centuries has been a witness to a story that the world too often tried to silence. When mothers wept as their children were taken from them during slavery, those tears became chapters of truth that no plantation owner could erase. When fathers wept silently after a long day of backbreaking labor, their tears told the world of the weight carried by a people whose dignity was denied but never destroyed. Each tear was a word, a sentence, a paragraph in the unfolding narrative of endurance that has shaped the identity of generations. In every era of struggle, tears have accompanied the cry for freedom. They flowed in the hush of midnight prayers, whispered in slave cabins as chains clinked in the background. They fell onto blood-stained soil where lives were lost under whips and violence. They appeared again on the faces of marchers beaten on bridges, of children denied entry to schools, of mothers who dressed their sons in Sunday best for funerals that should never have happened. The tears of the Black experience are the ink with which the history of suffering and survival has been written, an unbroken thread from the Middle Passage to the present day. These tears are not erased by time, they carry memory forward. They serve as reminders that history is not distant. It is living in the bloodline, in the traditions, in the songs, and yes, in the tears still shed today. They remind us that the stories of our ancestors cannot be forgotten even when textbooks exclude them, even when society tries to sanitize them. Tears have preserved history in ways that ink on a page could not, because they carry the weight of emotion, the power of grief, and the endurance of faith. They are history written on the soul. When one studies the Black experience, one does not only study facts, dates, and events. One studies the tears that accompanied them. For in those tears lies the full human truth, the heartbreak of chains, the humiliation of segregation, the sting of injustice, and yet also the dignity of a people who refuse to let sorrow define their destiny. These tears are not only about pain, they are about persistence. They record not only what was endured, but also what was overcome. Thus, to speak of Black tears is to speak of history itself, a history soaked into the earth, carried in the hymns of the church, echoed in the cries for justice, and passed down like sacred testimony. They are more than emotional responses. They are living records. Each tear carries the voice of those who came before us, whispering their story, reminding the world that though oppression tried to bury their truth, the tears of a people have ensured that history cannot be silenced. Tears, though born from pain, are not barren. They fall to the earth like rain, and in their falling they give life. For a seed cannot grow without water, and a people cannot grow without struggle. The tears of Black people, shed across centuries, have been the hidden nourishment that allowed resilience, strength, and creativity to take root. Though the world sought to crush them, those tears watered the soil of possibility, ensuring that even in the darkest nights, new life would emerge. Just as a desert is transformed when rain falls, so too has oppression been unable to dry out the spirit of a people whose tears became rivers of renewal. When a mother cried out in prayer for her child's safety, her tears watered the soil of courage that her children would later walk upon. When fathers wept silently at gravesides of sons and daughters stolen by violence, their tears became the unseen fertilizer of determination, driving future generations to demand a world where such sorrow would not be repeated. Tears of sorrow turned into seeds of strength, tears of grief transformed into harvests of hope. What looked like weakness to the world was, in truth, a divine exchange. Pain poured out, becoming power passed down. Tears also nourish because they cleanse the soul, making space for something new to grow. Without tears, a bitterness might have hardened into stone, but through weeping, the heart remained tender, ready to love again, ready to hope again, ready to fight again. These tears prevented despair from taking permanent root. They washed away the dust of defeat and opened the ground for fresh beginnings. Where others might have expected only despair, tears created fertile ground for faith. Where the soil was dry with injustice, tears soaked it with determination. Generations later, we see the fruit of those watered seeds. Out of the tears of enslaved ancestors came spirituals that carried both sorrow and strength. Out of the tears of civil rights mothers came victories that opened doors to education, opportunity, and dignity. Out of the tears of Black communities mourning their martyrs came movements that shook nations and reshaped laws. None of these triumphs sprang from comfort. They all grew from tears that nourished the soil of history, making way for justice to sprout. And so we understand that tears are not wasted. They are investments. Each one dropped into the soil of suffering becomes a silent offering, producing a harvest far greater than the eye can see. These tears, invisible to the oppressor, have been the secret streams keeping alive a hope that refuses to die. They have fed the roots of resilience, nourished the branches of courage, and ripened the fruit of freedom. Tears, then, are not the end of life. They are the hidden water that sustains it. Tears are not only a response to pain, they are a gift passed from one generation to the next. Just as wealth, land, or wisdom can be inherited, so too can tears. The tears of our ancestors did not vanish into the dust of yesterday. They were carried forward and embedded in the stories, songs, and prayers that shaped the lives of their children. When a grandmother wept over the injustice she endured, her tears became lessons in endurance for the little ones who watched her bow her head but never break her spirit. Those tears, unspoken yet deeply felt, became a part of the inheritance that gave strength to generations yet unborn. Unlike material inheritance, tears do not diminish when they are shared. A coin can be spent, a house can crumble, but the inheritance of tears grows richer as it is passed on. It is an inheritance of resilience, teaching every child who sees parents' sorrow that dignity is preserved even in the midst of hardship. It is an inheritance of empathy, reminding the next generation that suffering should not make us bitter, but compassionate. It is an inheritance of faith, showing that even when everything else is stripped away, tears still carry prayers to heaven. Tears as inheritance mean that we do not suffer alone or in vain. The tears of the past continue to empower the present. The cries of those who were enslaved give voice to those who fight against modern chains. The tears of mothers in the civil rights era flow into the courage of their children who still march for justice today. Every drop of sorrow has been woven into the identity of a people, forming a living legacy that no oppressor could erase. Our tears are more than emotions. They are heirlooms, treasures of the spirit handed down so that we might not forget who we are or where we came from. In this way, tears are also teachers. They instruct us that the struggles of our parents and grandparents were not wasted, that their suffering was not meaningless. They remind us that every freedom we enjoy today was purchased not only with blood and sacrifice, but also with tears. When we inherit their tears, we inherit their vision of a better tomorrow. We inherit their courage to stand when the world said sit down, to hope when the world said give up, to pray when the world said there was no God listening. This inheritance does not weigh us down. It strengthens us. It binds us to a lineage of faith, endurance, and hope. Just as an heir cherishes the keepsakes of a family, we hold close the tears of our ancestors as sacred reminders that we are not walking this journey alone. Every tear that fell before us is now carried within us, shaping who we are, guiding how we live, and preparing us to pass on the same inheritance of resilience to those who will come after us. Tears are often misunderstood as weakness, yet for Black people, they've have been a quiet form of resistance. In a world that tried to strip away humanity, to cry was to declare that the heart was still alive, that the spirit had not been crushed. When an enslaved man or woman shed tears, it was a way of saying, "You cannot take away my ability to feel, to mourn, to love, to hope." Tears resisted the lie of dehumanization. They were proof that the soul could not be owned, that the inner life of a people could not be shackled. Every tear shed was an act of defiance against a system that wanted silence and submission. Tears also resisted the temptation to grow numb. Oppression tries to make people cold, to harden them until they feel nothing. But every tear that fell from the eyes of the oppressed was a refusal to let cruelty turn into callousness. It was a way of saying, "I will not let hatred rob me of my heart." To cry in the face of injustice was not surrender. It was resistance to becoming like the oppressor. Tears kept compassion alive where bitterness threatened to take root. They preserved tenderness in the midst of brutality, ensuring that love outlasted hate. In times of violence and injustice, tears became a silent protest. They were the unspoken cries that reached beyond words when language was not enough. When children were barred from schools, when men and women were beaten for marching, when lives were cut short by racial violence, tears fell as a testimony against injustice. Each tear carried within it an indictment of the systems that caused them. Though silent, those tears spoke louder than any speech. They were a resistance that could not be censored, for no law, no chain, no bullet could stop them from falling. Tears also resisted despair. In moments when it seemed easier to give up, tears became a way of holding on. They released the weight of sorrow so that the soul could keep moving forward. To cry was to resist the finality of hopelessness, to refuse the idea that suffering was the end of the story. Tears gave strength to rise again, to march another mile, to sing another hymn, to pray another prayer. Resistance was not only in the marches and the speeches, it was in the tears that kept people human enough to keep going. And perhaps most powerfully, tears resisted invisibility. In a society that often tried not to see the suffering of Black people, tears forced the world to reckon with humanity. They carried a moral power that demanded recognition. Look at me. See my pain. Acknowledge my worth. Tears made it impossible to deny the human story behind the statistics, behind the chains, behind the headlines. They were a resistance that said, "You may try to erase me, but you cannot erase my sorrow, and you cannot erase my hope." Tears are love made visible. They flow when words cannot carry the weight of the heart. For Black people, so many of those tears have been born out of deep love for children, for community, for faith, for freedom. A mother's tears at the cradle of her child are not only sorrow for the dangers the world may bring, but love so fierce that it cannot be contained. A father's tears at the funeral of his son are not just grief for a life lost, but love so profound that death itself cannot silence it. Every tear shed in the long history of struggle has been rooted in love, a love that endures even when the world gives no reason to keep believing. Tears have been the way love has been passed down across generations. A grandmother's weeping prayer over her family became an act of covering. a shield made not of steel but of love. Love. Those tears whispered, I will not give up on you even when the world gives up on us. In homes where there was little money, little food, and little recognition, tears carried the love that sustained life. They were poured out in the quiet hours of night, unseen by the world, but felt in the strength of children who somehow found courage to rise each morning. Even in the face of hatred, tears revealed love's persistence. While oppression preached violence, the tears of the oppressed preached mercy. While injustice tried to sow bitterness, the tears of mothers, fathers, and leaders testified to a love that refused to be poisoned by hate. To cry for someone else, for a neighbor, for a stranger, for a nation, is one of the greatest signs of love. It says, your pain touches me, your life matters to me, your future is bound to mine. That is why tears have been so powerful in Black history. They show a love that cannot be extinguished by cruelty. Tears, as love also created community. In the hush of church services, in the fellowship of families, in the gatherings of protest and prayer, tears were shared, binding people together. When one wept, others wept too. That shared crying became a bond of love, a reminder that no one was alone. Tears built bridges between generations, between neighbors, between those who carried the same wounds. They became a language of love understood by all, even when words failed. And love expressed through tears has always been creative. It birthed the music of sorrow and joy, the poetry of lament and hope, the prayers that carried people through nights of despair. From those tears came songs that comforted, hymns that strengthened, and movements that refused to die. Love made its way into every tear, and from those tears grew art, faith, and visions of a better tomorrow. Love watered by tears has always been stronger than hate, armed with weapons.